Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that people said time and again, right? It was like, who are the alphas this year? Who are the alpha? Who are the top dogs? We had come into the season with an assumption of who we thought those teams would be. I don't know if we know enough at this point to say that we're necessarily wrong on that front, but it feels like through 3 weeks of the college football season, there's a lot more parity than expected. Some questions about, is that due to the transfer portal? Is that due to coaching? Is it due to quarterback turnover? You could have a million theories as to why that's the case, but I don't necessarily disagree that it feels like we're set up for maybe one of the most wide open years of college football we've had in a long time.
Is that a good thing? Like, is it a good thing that, and I will only speak for myself or for the two of us, is it a good thing that now 3 weeks into the season, 4 for some teams, that the sense we have is still pretty murky? That I don't know how much we want to hold Georgia's first half against South Carolina, or if the sort of underlying whispers about Georgia offensive inconsistency is something that's going to bear out over the course of their still pretty disappointing schedule, maybe even a little bit more disappointing with Tennessee's specific loss to Florida. But if we're going to hold that start against Georgia, do you like going into the final however many 11, 12 weeks of the season thinking, I guess it's just a Rutgers year. I guess it's just Rutgers coming out of the Big Ten East, and everything else will fall into place around the Fighting Schianos of Piscataway. Like, I think it's great because as much as I love knowing going into weekend, like, oh man, we have such a great concept of this number 3 against this number 7. I kind of like the, going into the dance with a little jitters, Ty. What's it going to be like when the slow song hits? I like that.
I do, and I think most college football fans feel that way too. I think one of the biggest arguments against college football, right? Against college football, against maybe the 4-team playoff, as I think I've made in the past, is that when you go into a season with this feeling of inevitability around Georgia, around Alabama, even around Ohio State, I could list 1,000 teams here, but that sense of inevitability turns people away. And when you go into a year or even into a week feeling like it is a foregone conclusion, people hate that. People hate that. Now, part of what makes college football great is the fact that you can be a 20-something point underdog and you can still win the game. You can be Boston College and still have a shot inside 2 minutes, if you don't pull the face mask of a Florida State ball carrier, to win the game.
Right.
That only happens in college football. That's not something that you see across major sports across the board here in the United States. But that sense of inevitability turns people away. And
yes, I think yes and no, though, if I can jump in really quick. I think there is something about being able to align your expectations. Like right when you set the bar at Georgia, when you set the bar at the best of Ohio State, if they lose or if they struggle with a team, then you can make judgments based on that, right? It's the white balance effect that, like, okay, this is where I'm going to set my camera. This is what white value is. And so if we have a great sense of what the top is, then we can sort of filter in everything beneath it. And so, like, in this instance, you're like, oh man, Texas upset Alabama. How huge is that? Well, if Alabama goes 8-4, not as huge, right?
Yeah.
So
some people compared the Texas win perhaps to what we saw a couple years back when Notre Dame and Texas played very, very early on in the season.
Right,
and
the 18-wheeler.
We drew conclusions based on that, and then they were all wrong by the time we got to the end of the year.
Right. So it sets a bar. It sets a standard when you have those teams. As bad as it makes, the inevitability feeling, and if you care about the national championship and you know that your team doesn't recruit like a potential national champion, to take some of that luster off of it. But at the same time, when you have the, like, oh man, these are the Power 5, it makes upset spicier. It makes struggles spicier. It lets you point to something. It gives you as a fan a North Star of hope for where your program could possibly go or get closer to. So that's why I appreciate it, as to steal Ben Golliver's term, a win connoisseur, Ty. Not a wine, a win connoisseur. But at the same time, I love the chaos of week to week just shrugging and not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, college football is built on upsets. It's built on the art of the possible in a way, and it is very much built on chaos.
Yeah.
It is very much built on chaos. And I can't imagine in the history of our show, going back 15 years now, I was trying to think of this earlier, going back 15 years, headed into week 4, feeling like I knew less than I do in 2023.
Yeah.
I really don't feel like I know who's good and who isn't. I have a pretty good sense for where the top is, but in terms of who is good, who is not good, man, we could talk about 25 teams. I truly don't know about a bunch of these teams, how it's going to shake out by the time all is said and done.
Yeah, I agree. And the only other drawback I would say, because again, I think it's a net very positive thing, is we're seeing some of this happen as it coincides with underwhelming quarterback play.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just like, oh, it's cool that Alabama's not excellent. You know, the SEC's more wide open. Who's going to challenge Georgia? Or maybe Georgia's not the same without Stetson Bennett. But like, if it means more Alabama offensive displays against USF over the course of this year, against Ole Miss, against Arkansas, against Texas A&M, whatever, I don't see that as necessarily a positive thing if we have to sit through those types of offenses. So hopefully the chaotic nature of the early season expresses itself with quarterback development and improvement over the course of the year. Not like, well, Kyle McCord looks different than CJ Stroud. And I just want all of that to improve so that the standard and the bar keeps rising. That's all.